This video is just me filling out the One DND playtest survey, which will of course give me a chance to express my opinion not only to Wizards of the Coast, but also of course everyone watching along, and talk about a bit of the stuff that I think is nice about what we've gotten in the first playtest for Character Origins, and of course also what's less nice. I also highly recommend and urge you to go in and fill out the playtest survey if you have any opinion at all, because it's going to help us, or help the Wizards of the Coast, create a better 5.5 or 6th edition or whatever the hell is going to end up as. And of course also please sound off in the comments below if you disagree with something, like the video, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you want more awesome D&D content like this. So yeah, without further ado, let's take a look at the Wizards of the Coast playtest survey number 1. I will of course leave a link to the survey down below, but without further ado, let's get ready to rumble. The first question we ask if we would like to rate the material. Yes, that's exactly why we're here. The second question is what edition of D&D we first played, and I started out in 3rd edition back in 2002, 3, something like that. So it's been a while. So how satisfied were you overall with the character origin options as presented in the article? Human, I was unfortunately a bit dissatisfied. We'll get more into that later because we're going to go through these one by one, I think. For the Artling, also not hugely satisfied. The Dragonborn, I think, was also unfortunately a bit underwhelming. And the Dwarf, I actually think that I wanted to do these kind of stuff, but I guess that I should put it here because there is one thing about the Dwarf that I would change. Then we have the Elf. I think that the Elf in its current form is very good, actually. I don't think there's anything we really need to do about that. And then we have the Gnome, of course, which get a lineage and advantage. I think that's also pretty decent. I also pretty much like where the Halfling is at. Then we have the Orc, which has the powerful build, and it has lineage. I think also the Orc is in a good place, probably. And then we have the Tieflings, and I think that the Tieflings are also in a good place. So the first question we're going to get is how satisfied we were with the various human elements of the human race. And we have resourceful, that's the inspiration bit. I'm very satisfied with that. Skillful, I think that's good. And I think that the skilled feat or another first level feat of your choice is also very good, especially now that first level feats are a bit less problematic, or should be, I think in the final iteration, a bit less problematic. Alright, so what I've written here is that I think that tying the inspiration mechanic to a core race makes it hard for DMs to house rule how inspiration works, and also can be somewhat problematic if DMs hand out too much or too little experience, and of course means inspiration. As inspiration functions in its current form, I wouldn't want it tied to any race. So I'm not saying that this is a bad feature, the resourceful feature that allows a human to gain inspiration whenever they finish a long rest, but I don't want it on the race as inspiration works right now. If they do something where inspiration is purely mechanical and they sort of fix how it functions, then sure, put it on a race, because there will be no intrinsic need to house rule it. But as inspiration is now, I would probably want to house rule it, and I also wouldn't know how little inspiration to dole out and stuff like that, so I would probably want inspiration to be a separate mechanic. I have a long video going into my issue with the new inspiration. You will find a link to that somewhere down below, or in a card up here, something like that. But anyway, that is my opinion on the human. We have the Artling race, and it gets angelic flight. It's fine, I think. Limited flight isn't a big issue for me. And then we have these 3 subclasses, Exalted, Heavenly, and Idyllic, and I'll do Dissatisfied with each of those. And then we have Damage Resistance to radiant damage, that's fine. Alright, so what I've written here is that I'm not a huge fan of the Artling being a celestial creature with an animal face appearance. I don't see it as a core race necessarily, and I think it's a bit random as a new character race. I much prefer this Aasimar for the celestial race, or if it is your preference, distinct animal-like races such as the Minotaur, Heron, etc. I personally have no desire to play a character that looks like an animal. I can see that it's something some people would want to play, and I think that's fine. I don't necessarily think that needs to be a core race, and it needs to be something that is tied to being angelic. I don't really understand that flavor, that lore. It's not something we've had in D&D before, I think. And it's not something that I would necessarily want there to be in Dungeons & Dragons. So what I'm trying to say here with a lot of words is that I don't like the flavor of the race, and I would much prefer, yes, that we have minotaurs, herringons, cat-like races. I can't remember all of them, but there are many races based on animals, and those are distinct. They have their own unique flavor, and the DM can allow or disallow them at their preference, and I think that works a lot better, in my opinion. So yeah, that's my opinion on the Artling. Next up, we have the Dragonborn character option, and as you can maybe remember, the Dragonborn got a breath weapon that has a DC of 8, Constitution and Proficiency bonus, deals 1d10 plus character level, and can be used as an action a number of times equal to Proficiency bonus per long rest. So I am still dissatisfied with the breath weapon. I think it's a step back from what we got in later books. I am fine with the damage resistance. I am very satisfied that it's finally got Dark Vision, even though Dark Vision is still probably not a feature that every race should have. If we're gonna give it out to elves and stuff like that, the Dragonborn, of course, also needs to have it. So, okay. So my issue with the Dragonborn's breath weapon is that it still feels rather weak. It's good that it's now always a cone and that it scales a bit better than the player's handbook version, but I still think it needs more aggressive scale and or the ability to use it as a bonus action to really make that race worthwhile. It has to be better than just taking the attack action or casting a cantrip. And that really sums it up. At the 1d10 plus character level, then at level 10 that would deal an average of 15 damage, and or let's say level 11 to really compare it, and you would have cantrips such as Firebolt dealing also 15 damage. And I know you can hit an AoE with your breath weapon, but it's still quite rare that you'll hit more than one or two creatures maybe, which then have a saving throw to halve it and so on. So I just think it needs to be a bit better, but that's also all that I need from the dragon. Besides that, I think it's really fine the way it is, especially with Dark Vision now tagged onto it. Moving on, we have the Dwarf character option, and I think that I'm satisfied that it has Dark Vision. I am satisfied that it has Dwarven Resilience. I am satisfied that it has Dwarven Toughness. I am very dissatisfied that it has Forge Wise, and I like the new Stone Cunning. Alright, so what I've written is that I think the new Stone Cunning is great. I like that it's Tremor Sense, which also feels like something that would be biological. I don't like Forge Wise, as we are once again going back to assuming that a race would know specific tools regardless of where and how they grew up. If you want tools, it should be any tools instead of this limited list, but really I prefer to have tools removed from races entirely. Wizards of the Coast have done so much to sort of remove all the stuff that wouldn't be a racial thing from races, but they've for some reason stuck Forge Wise on the Dwarf, which again, I went over this in my first take on the Character Origins playtest, but what if you have a dwarf that grew up in the forest? Why would it be proficient with duelist tools, mason tools, smith tools, or tinker tools? Why not let it be proficient with woodcutting tools or something like that? Or maybe just still have tools only be something that is dependent on the background. So yeah, that's my take on the new dwarf. And then we have the elf here. I am just gonna fill this out quickly. I am sort of still dissatisfied with Dark Vision. I don't think it needs to be there for everyone, but that is how Dark Vision works in 5e, so you sort of need to do it, but really we still kind of need that low light vision option, I think. So yeah, I don't really have big thoughts on the drow or the elf, so we're just gonna move on from here. And then we have the gnome Dark Vision, sort of again, not necessarily required to have it. Gnomish Cunning, I like that it's just advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. Is it powerful? It's quite powerful, but the gnome doesn't get that much more than that. So in that way, it's sort of a boring race, but I'll do satisfied for all of it. But I think it looks pretty decent and balanced overall. Then we have the Halfling, which has advantage on saving throws against being frightened. That's fine. It has Halfling Nimbleness. That's also fine. And then we have Luck. Luck is sort of tied into a lot of stuff, so if they start using the roll of a 1 on a d20 for other stuff, I could see that being an issue. But for now I'll say that it's fine, it's worked fine, it's a really powerful feature and one of the reasons you'll want to be a Halfling. And proficiency in the stealth skill is also fine with me. Then we have the Orc race. I think the Adrenaline Rush thing is sort of underwhelming. Getting 2 to 6 temporary hit points isn't a lot, and the dash action, what if you're a rogue? I'll probably put that in here and I'll say dashing as a bonus action isn't that useful for a lot of character classes, making the making the adrenaline rush less useful and perhaps limiting the class options for the orc. And what I mean here is that I always feel like if I just pick a race and then pick a class that also gives the same feature as the race, then I sort of feel like I've wasted something and I'd rather pick another race or another class, and that means you're probably not going to see a whole lot of orc rogues, for example, because you have that overlap, or orc rangers, who I believe also get to dash. We'll see when the new character classes come out. So I prefer not to give orcs or any race stuff that they would also get from a class, because you get that sort of overlap. I prefer if these things were like not as common to get on a class anyway as dashing on a bonus action is. Dark Vision is fine, Powerful Build is fine, pretty useless, and Relentless Endurance is always and have always been a very fun feature. Overall, I think that the orc is probably a bit weak compared to other races. So yeah, I think it's a bit on the weaker side when you compare it to some of the other stuff. Would you rather have Relentless Endurance or, for example, the Gnomish Cunning? I know what I prefer, and I don't think that that the Adrenaline Rush really gives it that much. Moving on, we have the Tiefling, and the Tiefling gets, of course, Dark Vision again, satisfied maybe, and then we have some spell list. I think that these are mostly fine, not gonna have a huge opinion here. And Otherworldly Presence gives the Thaumaturgy cantrip, also fine. Don't have a lot of comments on that. How satisfied were you overall with the character background section as presented in the article? I think I was very satisfied. I think they did it the right way, that making it completely optional how you put together your background, but then doing some sample backgrounds. I really like that. How satisfied were you with the elements of the character background as presented in the article? And we'll just go and find these in the document. Background features. I think that this is fine. I think that skill proficiency is fine. I think that this is fine. I think that language is maybe the only one where I think, because you get common, you get another language from your background, and you maybe get another language from your race as well, often, I think. So I think I'll probably do this, and then I think feed is fine, and I think that equipment is fine. And I'm just gonna be careful that we are giving out too many languages to characters. So maybe common plus 1 for races that have a language is fine. I don't necessarily think all characters should know 2+ languages. It makes sense that if you're a half-orc, you know orc and common. I like that. But it doesn't make sense if you know orc, common, and draconic, for example, because unless, of course, you decided to get it, to take it, it would. So I think it would also be cool if 2 proficiencies languages were interchangeable, so you'd get 2 of any choice. So in this way you could say, okay, my character doesn't know any tools, but it knows 2 additional languages and so on. I think that's a really fun or better way to do it, probably, because it also makes sense that if you weren't training with tools, you had some time to pick up a language and vice versa. So yeah, it's a minor thing, not a huge issue in any way, I think, but it's something that I probably preferred if it were this way. Which of the backgrounds have you playtested? I have not playtested any of them, and I am really not gonna do a lot on these because I don't think it matters a whole lot. I don't really have thoughts on the sample backgrounds. I think most players, aside from new players, are just gonna put together their own background as they want, making these sort of irrelevant and or only useful for newer players. And you could say that's a bad thing. That's maybe, personally I think it's a good thing, because it's already what we do in my game. I just let people choose ability scores, skill proficiencies, tool proficiencies, language, etc. So I don't really care that we get these sample backgrounds. I think there is something where you probably maybe want to like pick your background, and that feels special, and it's a kit you put on your character. But on the other hand, it leads to the stuff where, especially if you tie it to feats and ability scores, where every barbarian has to be a a forester or a farmer, so they can get that tough feat or savage attack, or I don't know, and it sort of puts characters in boxes. So I really just prefer the idea of having that stuff be completely not tied to anything. You can just put together your own background. But I think it's a matter of preference. That's just my thoughts. And as long as we can just create them on our own, I don't give a damn about these. My players are probably never going to take any of these as they are anyway. And I don't think a lot of players will. So, do you use feats when playing 5th edition? Always. How satisfied were you with the feats? And we're just gonna quickly run through this. I think that alert was fine. I think that crafter was sort of decent. I'm maybe dissatisfied because it's a lot about just making sure that crafting is actually going to be used in your game. If it's not, then that really doesn't do a whole lot. So more robust rules for crafting stuff would be really good. Healing, I'm very satisfied. I like that they did it with hit dice instead of the other way it worked, because healer is in fact a quite broken feat as it was before. Lucky feat, I think it's still a bit too strong. Magic initiate is fine, and I think that musician is sort of fine, and I think that savage attacker is still bad, and I think that skilled is fine. And I think that tavern brawler is still sort of bad, and I think that tough is still sort of boring. Just so that's the quick explanation of it. I think basically they just need to rebalance the feats so they are all on the same level if you're only going to be able to pick them first level. How satisfied were you with the elements of the rules glossy section as presented in the article? Okay, I could probably leave a lot of comments here, but we'll just quickly go through it as they think. D20 test, I am dissatisfied. D20 tests, better name, please. Maybe just D20 roll. Something a bit more intuitive and less gamey. Yeah, so basically Gravel just needs some fine tuning, I think. Really need to make sure it's balanced properly. I like that they have done incapacity in the right way, so they're taking reactions and actions away. We should mention that incapacitated also bonus actions. Unclear in text, so we'd want that. And then we have inspiration. So I had a whole video going with this, but basically they need to decide whether or not it's something you get back when you roll a specific number on a dice, or it's something that the DM is going to give out. It shouldn't be, in my opinion, both. It needs to be one or the other. And then of course they need to figure out how they can make it so that players aren't gonna try to just roll a lot of dice to get inspiration before they get into combat, stuff like that, or even in combat trying to make as many rolls during combat as possible to get that inspiration back. I can just see this being an issue in a lot of different ways. And I know most players are probably not going to do that, they're going to behave themselves, but just giving the opportunity for players to misbehave themselves is a bad move and something that is going to create more problems than it solves, which I think is not great for the game, because this new edition should be about fixing 5e's problem, not creating new ones that we have to house rule. So yeah, that's my opinion. I am satisfied with the long rest. I think slowed is good, yeah, it's fine. Unarmed strike, fine. Arcane spell is, divine spell is fine. I'm just going to do that. And we're moving on to the next one. How satisfied as presenting rolling a 1? Sure. Rolling a 20? Sure. Dissatisfied critical hits. Yeah, so basically my opinion on this is that I think that removing critical hits from DMs is maybe not the greatest move, and it takes away some of the danger of the game, some of what makes combat exciting. I also think that that could probably be solved by giving characters more hit points at lower levels, because that's where a crit will really just destroy your character. As for only adding weapon dice, I think that unnecessarily punishes rogues especially, so unless that's fixed, I don't really like it. I'd like rogues to be able to do that crazy critical. It really makes the class worse if they don't do something to compensate. And I also think that spellcasters using spell attacks cantrips should be able to critical hit. Alright, moving on. I think how inspired I was dissatisfied, only one at a time, very satisfied, losing inspiration, sure. So basically I just think that giving inspiration as a mechanical thing is fine, and giving it because the DM says so is fine, but not both, and especially not when you're also tied into character races and backgrounds and classes and feats and stuff like that, because you end up, as I've explained in a long video, with some issues in how powerful or how balanced certain stuff is, if the DM could just give them out willy-nilly, or you can get them back on 20, blah, blah, blah. Not gonna go into all that. If you want my opinion, that there is a whole video on inspiration. So how satisfied are you with the elements of long rest as presented in the article? I think it's fine that we have the benefits of a rest. I like that they've sort of, I think, clarified that it's only one long rest per 24-hour period, and that you need to have 1 HP to get the benefit. And now combat completely interrupts the long rest and can be restarted, and I think that's also fine. So yeah, I like it. I'm not gonna hate on that. Any additional comments? Let's just say keep up the good work. Excited to see more. That was my feedback for the new One DND playtest, and I once again would advise you to go in and take the survey as well, so we can give them our opinion on how we think the game should be played and what kind of rules we like and dislike. It's really going to help make the game better, even if you disagree with me. And if you disagree with me or agree, please let me know in the comments down below, like this video and subscribe to the channel. And beyond that, there's not a whole lot left to say, except thank you so much for watching, and I hope that I'll see you in the next video.